Welcome, everybody, to the first webinar here with Mr. Derek Harris himself with HP Development. We are proud to present to you Analyzing Amateur Motocross from Minis to Vets. And this is going to be an ongoing podcast that we're going to do probably once to twice a month, depending on our schedules. But I want to welcome everybody. This is our goal with this podcast, is to really start to shed some light on everything relevant to amateur motocross. That's why we're calling it From Minis to Vets. There's not one category from either of those two bookends that we're not going to be addressing. So if you're a vet rider, we're not going to be talking about just minis. And if you're a mini dad and mom and you're trying to figure out how to navigate the landscape to go pro, we're going to be talking about that as well. So there's a lot of cross-germination, and we hope you guys will really dive in on the information that we're going to be sharing with you for an indefinite period of time. Derek, before I continue on, how the heck are you doing, man? Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Awesome to be on here with you, Coach Robb, and doing well. Staying really busy. It's every single year you think that wintertime is going to be a little bit of a break, and it's just full blast in our, in the amateur motocross world. So, doing well and excited to do this podcast with you.
I'm so glad that you mentioned how busy you guys are. You and I talk off the record quite a bit. I don't know how, and I understand you've got a team and you've got, good guys working for you. I'm always amazed how much stuff you have your fingers in, whether it's the R&D for your team, your development. I know you do quite a bit behind the scenes for a lot of other teams and programs. What kind of background, just for the sake of the listeners who may not have the privilege of hearing you, I've been on a couple of podcasts with Hopper with you, and I'm always mesmerized, and Johnny and I talk about it as well, the depth of knowledge that you have. Do you mind sharing with the listeners a little bit about both your racing background as well as that educational background?
Yeah, sure. So like pretty much anybody who's probably watching or racing or riding, grew up riding dirt bikes. Started actually late compared to, most of the amateur national side of things. But my dad rode street motorcycles. I'm a kid. I'm like, that's cool. I'd love to ride motorcycles. So we decided, well, the only thing you can ride when you're not, 16 or older is dirt bike. So we went out and just got a dirt bike. Didn't really race at first, rode them around, had fun with it. And then when we moved, actually my family moved to Texas when I was, I think, 7 or 8. Texas isn't full of private land. So you can't just go, or public land. You just can't go ride. So instead of being able to just go ride, you basically go to the motocross track, or that's your, there's that or some off-road ranches. So yeah, we got into motocross that way. We went to, some local tracks and slowly, I'm competitive. I think most people are competitive. So when you get into that, it just grows from there. So I started racing from that. We didn't know anything about it, like zero, family didn't do it. Dad didn't do it. We didn't have friends who did it. And, as we got into it, you start to meet the people around and you kind of get some knowledge and you kind of see this and that. And that's just what we did. I probably didn't even know Loretta Lynn's existed till I was probably 14. Like, it wasn't something that was on our radar.
Yeah.
And then as we got faster and faster and I got pretty, kind of winning around all the local stuff, then you start to hang out with people and you're like, oh, there's a whole nother level to this sport. That's more than your like local racing. So that was interesting.
What was the first bike? What was that first bike you had? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I'll never. So PW80.
Okay.
So like, if you're most people don't know them nowadays, but they're very analogous to like an XR50, but a bigger version of it. And that bike beat it into the ground within like the first year. Just could not keep up.
That had a metal tank on it or no?
No, those are plastic tanks. Yeah,
I'm thinking of the DT80.
Yeah. Okay. PW80
so
plastic tank, but they have like I wore the top end out to the point where it wouldn't even run within, quickly. We didn't know what that was. Like, it won't run, we didn't know. That was funny. And then I got fast enough where I tried to jump the thing, and you really shouldn't jump those bikes. So I bent the frame and subframe all up. And then,
oh boy,
then we're like I don't think it was for Christmas, but my dad came home with a 65.
Nice.
I remember just thinking in my head, because the PW is real short.
Yep.
And I'm like, that bike's so big, I'll never be able to ride it. And that's where the motocross side just took off. So we went from like just playing to then the 65. Actually, it was a 60 back then. They didn't have 65s, but
was it the Honda CR60?
No, those were just slightly before me. So it was a KX60.
KX60. Okay.
KX60, and it had that like really they had the round, tiny silencer. They don't have that anymore. And it was really loud back then. And so, you could hear those bikes all over the track.
And for that 60, what was your first 85 or 80 as we used to call them back then?
Yeah, so this is actually, we'll talk about this. This is funny, I think, talking about motors and what amateurs need. So
yeah,
we did not know the sport. We didn't know anything about mods. We didn't know anything about anything. And so we just I rode stock bikes my entire amateur, all the way till I went to college. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get into that later. But
yeah,
I had a KX80, was my first 80. We bought it from like the fastest local kid in the area. He actually was like an amateur national champion and a really, really fast guy. So we bought his used bike, which in hindsight, like, it's so funny when you don't know, you're like, I want to buy that guy's bike.
Yep.
Right. Nowadays, you're like, if you're me, you're like, no, don't go buy that racer's guy's bike. Now, granted, luckily, it ended up being a great bike. His dad was like kind of like a guy you would take your motors to if you needed a crank done. He was a very good mechanic. So the bike was perfect. We got lucky. It was an awesome bike, bone stock. And that was right when Kawasaki went to the 85. So we bought the previous year model. The 85 was out. And I'll never forget, we went to like a GNC. I don't remember if it was back then. There's, we had Ponca, you had Loretta's, you had competing entities. And one of those races was like a GNC C series or something like that. It was a track and Bastrop called Lakeside. Huge race. I don't remember what it was. Again, we weren't chasing it at the time. So it was in our Texas area. Let's go.
Yep.
And, on this previous bike that was used, I whole shot like multiple motos, 40 rider gates against all mod bikes. And we didn't know what mods were at the time. And I had kids coming over going, hey, what's done to that bike? Cause they're just like, how the hell did you rip these whole shots by a mile? And I'm like, what do you mean done to that bike? Like it's,
stock, isn't it?
I got 32-1 in it. Where am I up gas? Like what,
yeah.
What are you talking about? Like, you got a pipe? I'm like, no, I don't have a pipe, that kind of stuff. And
my dad doesn't smoke. No, I don't have a pipe. Do you?
Yeah. What are you talking about? Yeah. So we had no clue. And the irony being, years later, now I see that side of things where if a kid's getting starts, the other kids nowadays are like, oh, what are you doing? And a lot of the, it's just funny. So
yep,
that was the next one. And then we ended up going to Yamahas.
Okay.
And
what year would that have been? What year?
I gotta think. I have a horrible memory. So
what color was it?
It was blue.
It was. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe you got one of the early yellow ones before it went white and then blue.
No, we were after the white. It was blue, white, probably side panels.
Okay.
And man, I started going to big bikes around 15-ish, right at the beginning era of the 4-strokes. So
gotcha.
So that the 85 was probably 92,000-ish, somewhere around there. And we did a couple Yamahas.
Did you get them brand new?
Brand new. So we got that brand new. And then at the end of the year, we would trade one in and go get another one. We had a great dealer. And funny story in that with amateur motocross with parents having to deal with their stuff is my mom didn't really love motocross. And so my dad didn't want to tell her that he was going to get a new bike. So literally he got a new bike, traded it in, came home, and it was in the garage, and he didn't tell her, of course, I don't recommend this for your marriage.
Right. Yeah.
And she's like, wow, it looks so good. He's like, oh yeah, new plastic, new tires,
It's just a BNG package. That's all it is.
Yeah, no,
that's all.
For a little while, she didn't know that we got new bikes. So
she's not looking at the bank account. She's fine. Everything's good.
So that's how you had to slide that one in on mom. So that, and then my first. So then I was literally at the cusp of, do we go 125 or do we go 250F?
Okay.
And we didn't know because at the time the 2-stroke was still the popular bike. Only Yamaha had the 250F and Honda wasn't out yet. So yeah, we're talking like, I think 0203 was probably our first 250F, somewhere around there. And so we ended up going the 250F route because a family friend of ours who's a mechanic owned one. And he's like, dude, he sweared by it. He's like, this bike's incredible. It's so much better because he had 125s. My dad had 125s. I had rode his 125 on 85s, a few times. And so, I was right on that cusp. So we went 250F early on.
Okay.
Which they had their teeth, if I stalled it or crashed in a race, just push it back to the truck. You're not going to start it.
You're not going to start it.
I was too small and it just wasn't going to happen. So, which is a good lesson on like, hey, if you want to finish races, don't crash, like that kind of deal. So, but when we got that, it was like, I was really coming into my own as riding, started to ride pretty good. And of course the bike was a huge advantage over 125 on the starts and on fast tracks, massive advantage. And we didn't really know how big at the time, that comes out later when you start watching pro racing and you have these 3-digit dudes dominating whole shots in the outdoor nationals, just total private guys and Yamaha 250Fs versus factory 125s.
Yeah.
You're starting to see that and go, oh, I think we, made the right choice. So yeah, after that, I really started kind of went on a tear as far as riding really well, winning a lot, whole shot a lot, riding really good. And
now, were you guys tinkering with the bikes at all? Or you just pretty much running your stock 4-stroke?
Bone stock. We kept bike stock as the amateurs, not anything we worked on. So back on the background side of things, that's the riding side.
Yeah.
Dad is a PhD mechanical engineer. Mom is a PhD chemical engineer. Uncle is a PhD multiple engineer. Whole family. My dad's dad was a mechanic type individual, and then and just lucky to be around. So I grew up with cool projects at the house that I find cool, like nerdy stuff. That literally, this is a crazy story, but my Texas, my winning state science fair project, which of course was very little my own. I mean, it was stuff I worked on, but not stuff I was capable of at the time.
Yeah.
We did my first one. We put strain gauges on a bicycle, and then it had and this is all stuff before any of this existed. We're still talking the dial-up internet era, right?
Yes.
No Wi-Fi existed yet. My dad created a Wi-Fi network while I rode this bicycle around that beamed it back to the computer in the house and took the strain gauge data from the bike. And then we would measure the highest strain areas of the bicycle frame. And I would jump it around and jump, off curbs and jumps and whatever. And so I just wanted to see which area of the frame is the weakest or, what's the most likely to fail, what areas, where's all the stresses. So we did that. And so I won state for that. And then, of course, I didn't do the Wi-Fi and the network, all that stuff. That was my dad did. And then the next year, which is kind of where I was always into mechanical things, right? I loved working on my bike, and I was just fascinated with it. So the next year we won, and we created so I wanted to know how much power do you put out as a human being on a bicycle? And then number two, in order to make like in science fair, you have to make like a hypothesis, and then prove it. So the hypothesis was, do gears change horsepower?
Okay.
And most people don't know this, right? They don't have never thought about it. They don't pay attention in high school physics and beyond, and they just don't even think about it. So that was a hypothesis. And then what we did was created the world's first bicycle power meter that now is consumerly available.
Oh, hell yeah.
I would be anymore. We would just be having a race team right now. But the way engineers' minds work, you don't think to sell. So my dad's not a salesman. So we literally created a strain gauge that goes on the crankset and created the software, the measurement techniques, the onboard to measure power as you ride.
And what year was this?
Oh, man.
You said high school, right?
This is middle school, eighth grade. Yeah. So I won science fair back-to-back for those two. Got the President's Award. I actually got a $100 bond for that hanging up on my wall in here or whatever, that'll mature when I'm 50 or whatever. That, and then that continued. So that continued on into just cool projects throughout high school and stuff that I, was interested in. And then, so we did stock bikes. I went to Texas A&M for mechanical engineering and actually never finished. I got into what I do now. So was kind of, doing that in the summers. I was working at CNC machine shops and various fab shop jobs, just, for summer work. And then, very long story short, never finished, but was kind of doing, I worked for a couple engineering companies as interns and just did some really cool work with one company that did defense projects. And I did some work for Lockheed Martin through my dad's company at the time, doing some, modeling and analysis of the parts and stuff that as a kid, I was just got to see my dad do, and we got to do, and I'd go to his work and play in his labs and stuff and just stuff like that. So that kind of was that. HP was born literally out of necessity on the suspension side of things.
Okay. I don't think many people know that.
Yeah, we do suspension. I don't do as much as I used to, and there's various reasons, but we used to be the dominant player in my little area. And so like everybody was on HP, all the fast guys, and then of course that translates to everybody.
Yep.
So I sent my suspension out to a company in California. This is when I was in college, and got it back. Big company. It was horrible. It was that I had two bikes, a stock, and this other one's identical bikes. Horrible. Couldn't ride the bike. I'm like, this thing's unrideable. Didn't know anything about suspension at the time other than, I could turn clickers. I think I know what they do. And I could set my sag. That's what we could do. And I had success riding like that. So, we didn't really push out of it.
Yeah.
Get that back, trash. And I'm like, man, I can't ride it. So I'm like, I'm analytical. I'm like, hey, calling them, hey, can you guys help me? What can I do? You know, here, hey, I'll send you video. I got video of what it's doing. And they're like, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. You know, it's wrong. I'm like, well, here's my stock bike that's fantastic compared to this bike. Oh, no, no, no. And so anyway, I'm like, well, I'm not spending that money twice with another company I don't know.
Sure.
And I had rode a couple friends' bikes that had their stuff done. And I'm like, nah, I don't really like that. Like, I think this stock one's better. And luckily I had Yamahas at the time. They were good. So this, you know, this is the beginning of, this is right on the cusp of the current Yamaha suspension, actually, the SSS, currently what they have.
Okay.
And so I was like, I'm going to have to fix this myself. So what I first did was pull it all apart, compared it to my stock stuff. And there wasn't as much, YouTube and internet yet. So you really had to search. Nobody wanted to tell you. These companies,
That's
like,
right.
It's Black Magic, it's Voodoo, there's magic inside of there.
Yeah.
And I had sent it to, one of the prominent players. Like, we're talking, you name out 5 names, you're probably going to hit it, right?
Yep.
So,
yep.
So I tear them apart. And of course, I'm thinking, wow, there's going to be something in here that's cool. And I get in there and I'm like, I don't know what they did because I don't see anything in here compared to my stock stuff.
Oh, no.
But then I'm like, well, I need to get smarter. I don't know what's going on in here. So, hey, Dad, what's this do? How's this work? Let me, so we created some software and I wrote some code and had him help me with that and kind of predict suspension behavior. And then I got really serious and started getting the high-speed cameras out and taking them to the track. And so what I learned was, I'm like, oh, wow, there's shims in here and you move these shims around and they do something. So let me just batch the shims that they changed to the shims that are on my stock bike. And of course, back then it was hard to buy shims. Like, there wasn't a lot of resource on this. So
Yeah.
did all that. Okay, now I've got my 2 bikes back to about the same. Now let's try to make them better. And that's literally spearheaded about a year-long personal project of just every single week I would go work on my stuff. And then I had my second bike and would just go test and test and test and test. And I finally got to where the bike was really good, like really good. But I didn't know, like, I hadn't really put it to the test yet, but it was riding good. And I'd quit. So long story short, high school, blew my knee to the best, worst you could possibly blow it. It was riding really, really well. Maybe would want to chase a couple pro things, not make a career out of it, but see if I can make an outdoor or something, that kind of deal.
Yeah, sure.
Go to college was always a plan, go get a degree. And never thought about making a living riding dirt bikes. Wasn't even a thought process.
Yeah.
I destroyed my knee, severed my artery, dislocated it, nerve damage, like completely ruined it. And that was at the beginning of senior year. Basically quit riding dirt bikes, for a year, couldn't ride. Luckily managed to keep my leg. Then went to college. So then when I was in college, the second year, I ended up getting a bike again. And that's how I kind of got back into riding again. And then this would probably be year 3 of that when I started playing around with suspensions. So I'm still doing the college thing, doing some internship at work and at some engineering companies. And then by night, I'm working on my dirt bike, just revalving and learning it. So get that going. Then HP is born by letting some friends ride my bike. And they're like, dude, can you do that to mine? I'm like, yeah, I can do that to yours.
Yeah,
sure. Bring it by. So did that. And that started out with a couple of guys. And then I was riding with like one of the fastest local guys in the area who had like a little trading business at the local track. And he was like my riding buddy. And so we were becoming good friends and, he was the guy. And so I did his stuff and he had been with Enzo and with a bunch of companies around. And I'm like, he's like, he was like chasing the pro thing at the time, trying to, and I'm like, well, I'll do, he bought a new bike every 6 months or whatever.
Sure.
Well, let me get a crack at this bike. And if it's no good, then you just do your thing. Sure. So we did his, liked it, came over to me, and that literally started the brand. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to maybe start a business here. So started doing that, and I literally started out in suspension, and then I added in motor servicing. So we did just, hey, I can do your top ends, I can do replace valves or whatever you need, 2-stroke stuff. That's kind of was on the side or, aside to the suspension. And then fast forward from there, I always was personally interested in engines. Like as a kid, that was just so interesting to me. That was so cool to me. So I slowly started building that side of the mod business up. So like studying airflow, working on porting. I had no clue on 2-stroke technology at the time. So I started reading every book I could get my hands on. And there's some good ones that are out there. They're old. Mm-hmm. So like if you're on the internet, that's the information you'll find nowadays from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. All
the modern stuff, nobody will ever tell you, even though it's not that. It is evolved, but it's not in a book anymore. For whatever reason, people are less transparent. We're less transparent. But So it started go ahead.
Is that that red book that came out like in '82? It was called Tuning for Motocross. It was one. Brad Lackey had a book on fitness, and then there was one that was how to tune for motocross. Was that a good one, or
I don't look this one up? So the ones that I recall so there's one by, I think it's Two Strokes. Alexander Graham Bell.
Okay,
wrote one, and it's very academic. He was like a university individual.
Gotcha.
And so it's got math and port time area, all these things that you'll hear about Two Strokes that a lot of people quote now. He kind of pioneered some of these concepts and others, but this book kind of laid this concept out, which laid a direction for everybody to talk the same language. And then there's another guy named Daniel Blair, not Daniel Blair. He was Professor Blair. I'm blanking on his first name right now. Professor Blair, and I think in England, and they studied two-stroke technology for GP teams and all sorts of stuff in the MotoGP world.
I was gonna say that would be on the road side, right?
Yes. Okay. So they did that, and so he ended up, anything university usually gets published. So it ended up getting a lot of his work got published and what they worked on. So they came up with these concepts of scavenging, how to measure scavenging, which is basically just how much air comes in and out of your cylinder and how that happens. Two strokes obviously are very mechanically simple, but if you think about how they work, the fact that they even idle is mind-blowing. You have an exhaust port that's there. Intake ports are there, and they're open at the same time. Yeah. And so, at idle, you have a minuscule amount of air and fuel that's somehow got to find its way into the combustion chamber, not out the exhaust, and, work. It's pretty impressive. So, long story short, he started pioneering concepts and measuring, like they had these really neat test rigs, trying to measure single event flow patterns and how much air is trapped and all these things. And then they would measure, obviously, in the lab, like steady state airflow at various RPMs to get an idea of how much air is going in and out of this engine, and then doing math on, okay, well, this much going into it, but we're making this much power, then that means only so much of it we're keeping. These types of concepts boiled down. That has evolved nowadays into, there's some simulation software that was developed off of his work that this guy named Niels Vanek, I believe last name, developed. And he's getting older now, but very, very smart academic guy. He developed some simulation software that you can purchase. And then he's evolved that over the years to more and more papers that get published in universities on various topics. So combustion topics. I mean, an engine has amazing amounts of complexities in every single segment. So when you look at like how combustion works and flame propagation and heat transfer and all these variables, that in itself is multiple decades worth of research for researchers. And then you have airflow concepts. That's decades worth of research for airflow guys. And then nowadays with the modern computer, computing power is just exponential. Stuff that would take you a year to calculate back in the day now can be done like that on a modern desktop. So now papers are getting created that can model three-dimensional flow, which is a very complicated topic that takes huge computing power. These company, the PhD paper or some guy's thesis will be, how do we boil down three-dimensional flow into a two-dimensional simple mathematical model that's very simple. Okay. So that's kind of stuff that's evolved over the years. It's getting worked into this guy's sim software that we use and a bunch of other, good shops use for trying to beat down two-stroke ideas. And he even has four-stroke ideas. So that evolves. That's kind of in a nutshell how I got into it. And then I got down the motor path of just doing servicing. And you learn a lot in the service side, meaning, how do I keep this bike running 100% like it did the day it rolled off the showroom? Yeah. Most people will tell you, hey, if you run stock bikes and I go buy a new one and, oh man, that new stock bike is so good. It's so fast. And my old stock bike is clapped out. Why is that? Mm-hmm. Even if I do top ends, even if I try to freshen it up, those types of things. So hone in your skills on that, saying, oh, wow, okay, you can't just put parts in your motor. You need to make sure that your valve seats are fresh and correct and cut right. And you need to make sure that, your valve springs are up to pressure and correct. And we need to make sure that the bore is the right size and not oval and wore out, and that the rings are good and ring sealing. And when we do these top ends, what are the right techniques? Do we just slabber it full of assembly lube, or maybe do we do other things, right? So all these ideas that you have to come up with. Do cases wear out? That's actually an interesting topic, right? Does an engine degrade in performance with time, even if it's built correctly? And the answer to that is yes. Sure. So just learning those things, still doing suspension. Suspension business starts to build up. I was working for an engineering company at the time, full time. And then I would do dirt bike suspension and servicing by night. So I'd go to work all day, get up at like, so I think I got up at 5:30, get to work by 7, work till 5, get home by 6, and then work till 12 on dirt bikes, and then just rinse and repeat, and then go ride Saturday, Sunday. And that got to the point where I'm like, I can't do both. I'm too busy. So let me try to start my own business and, go out and, try to do it all on my own. And that's where I started. I think that was around 22 or 23, 24, something like that. 23, I think.
What year would that have been, Derek? So we look at how many years?
07, 08, something like that.
Okay.
And I think I started doing this around 06, like suspension playing, learning, kind of doing some friends. And then I officially, I think, went full blast. 08 or 09, I was 100% doing HP. No, wasn't working for anybody. And so in that era is kind of right when I started doing that. And that was, really the 4-stroke was full blast at this point. It had definitely been the dominant bike, but we still had 2-strokes. I owned 2-strokes at the time. And then, for fun, back then I wasn't riding again for trying to chase anything. So I had a 252 stroke. So that was that. And then the motor side just grew and grew and grew. I got more and more service work. And then I got personally more and more into mods and learning and chasing and testing and just adding equipment to the fold. Okay, I need a dyno really bad. I'm tired of going and renting dyno time.
Yeah.
And so, okay, get that. And then, I had one of the first things we had was we built a flow bench. And so, okay, cool. I've got a flow bench. I can measure flow, which you learn a lot from. And then you hit a plateau. You're like, man, this doesn't give me answers that the dyno's giving me, right? So that's the interesting things of how you learn on that side of things. So that's how it evolved. And then then that went from you start acquiring business, local level, and then you start acquiring like, hey, okay, this is Texas level. And then it started acquiring, hey, this is like regional, PK is chasing regionals. Mm-hmm. And then like, hey, you get that bug. You're like, hey, I want to keep doing better. We got guys that are winning at each of these steps. Now I want to go to Loretta's and win. I don't just want to be here, step 1. So we started getting some fast local kids. The business started growing, and one of the top first kids that I had was a kid named Jimmy Taylor. Super talented, super talented. Unfortunately, went down the wrong path in life later in teenage years, and he ended up passing away. I don't know, when he was young, like 21, 22. I think it was a car crash, but he got kind of riled up in some drugs and some abuse, substance abuse stuff, and went down the wrong path. But he was our first like Texas kid that we worked with that was going to Loretta's. We started with him before he was with Loretta's. When we came on board to him, he had never made Loretta's.
Nice.
First year we worked with him, he made Loretta's. The next year we worked with him, I think he got 9th or 10th or 11th, something like that. And the next year we worked with him, he moved to 125s and was, getting in his teeth wet in that. And then, he was our first one that we really got to go chase that and get that bug.
Yep.
And then that grew, over the years now. I mean, we've been fortunate enough to do Ty Masterful Super Mini winning motors. We did Caden Braswell, Schoolboy 2, 250 Pro winning stuff, and we've had all the fast Texas guys over the last 10 years, like Zane Merritt's of the world, who was actually, I think, in my opinion, should have won Rookie of the Year. Ty actually won that over him, but he only raced like 2 or 3 races. And Zane raced the whole outdoors as a full private guy, non-factory, was inside the top 20 pretty much every single round. I think he got a 11th or 12th, couple rounds. So he was one of our guys. We had a kid named Blake Nieheiser, super talented kid. I don't know. He just, typical like go pro. Oh, wow, this is hard. I'm out, but he had like won motos at Daytona and amateur pro, stuff like that. Super talented kid. We've had a kid named Shelby Peterson. Unfortunately, same thing. Amateurs, top 5 type guy, goes pro, out. Decided I'm not for me. And it's probably the right move if you don't have funding, right? Yeah. So, him, and then, and then that's kind of, we've just always had some of the fast Texas guys. And then there's been a lot of great ones that maybe not quite their level, but from the Texas side, we really enjoyed working with them. And really cool to see them grow. Like I've literally worked with a kid named Parker Larson, who was, when I first started working with them, they were like bad, like not good. And I'm like, we'll work with anybody. We'll try to provide anybody what we can the best.
Yep.
But, some kids are like, I don't think that kid's got it. Like, I'm sorry, man, but he's just not good. And he went from like that on 85s to racing local pro in Texas. In the winter series style races, if there's 15, 20 dudes, he could be 5 to 7. And the only guys beating him were guys making outdoor nationals and top 20. So,
gotcha.
Right in the cusp of being a pretty damn good rider.
Yeah.
That was cool to see a kid you take from basically the 85 beginner class. And then you work with him suspension and engines over the course of going to Loretta's and C, and then, moving all the way up to pro. And that's just really cool. So we work with a lot of guys like that. And yeah, it's just been that. Now my local business is down and our national business is way up. Like
we'll talk about the politics of that in a little bit.
Right. Like the
in
UPS
future shows.
truck just comes every day with motors. I mean, it's pretty much, you know, my shop guy, Eric, he's in and he's like, another motor, Derek, another motor, man.
Yep.
You know, so that's however business works. That's, you know, what we do now. But yeah, so that's that.
And that's going to be part of the show too. You know, just for those of you that are tuning in on this first conversation here, we're going to dive into all this. We're going to talk about politics, how politics can negatively taint the truth out of jealousy or to try to gobble up market share. We're going to try to help you parents and as well as the vet riders. We're going to get into all of this dirty laundry and how do you navigate it? If you jump onto my side of the fence, we call it the bullseye syndrome, where you go from being a local guy and everybody likes you because they're beating you to where your bullseye gets a little bigger on your back. And now the people you thought were your friends, they're not. The ones that you start doing well, they accuse you of cheating instead of actually putting in sweat equity. We're going to talk about all of these things, both on the physiological and the mechanical. And you're going to notice these conversations. This week, I want to make sure Derek gets all of his background out. Next week, I've been asked to do my background. We'll do that. And then we're going to just start folding it in. But the big thing is, no matter where you're at in the spectrum, there's a lot of little things to navigate. It's not just about throwing a lot of money at motors and suspension. It's not about throwing a lot of money at human performance and nutrition. How do you integrate these two so that you elevate? When Derek makes a comment like that, hey, this guy just doesn't have what it takes. Sure, you could be unethical and blow smoke up someone's skirt and tell them, oh yeah, your kid's got everything it takes. If you just spend X amount of money on suspension and go get a human performance coach and drop all this money, that's what we want to navigate, because I'll be the first one to turn a client down. I'll give them some basic things they need to do. Come back in a year. We'll reassess, physically reassess, and see if maybe you've gotten to that point. And like you said, Derek, how many people have you seen when the rubber hits the road, when it becomes work, they're tapping out?
100%. I think that's the weak link of the sport nowadays.
Yeah, well, we want to weed that out early. So you don't have a parent that spends 40, 50 grand, you know, facilities, bikes, travel, and then find out little Johnny's going to tap out because it gets a little bit difficult, especially when you see the playing field starts to get level as you get higher and higher.
Yep.
That's, you know, as the old saying that goes, Derek, you and I've joked about this off the record. You see somebody's true character when things get tough, whether that's relationships, finances, fitness, whatever. But I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, I want to clip it. Yeah. Well, that was a little long. So
no, it's good.
I think bringing it back into the fold of amateur racing. Yeah. 100% right. So so that's kind of where we started. It's how we got, we can, you know, we'll have the show edited as need be. So like, we'll get what we need out of it, but
no, we're going to leave all that there, but I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I love you to death because you're so damn intelligent. You don't even realize some of the things you said. First of all, anybody who's listened to this who has a cycling background now has a Woody thinking about the idea that you created the first, you know, power meter on a bicycle.
Yeah.
Right?
So
I mean,
we're so bummed. I could be like literally race team. No, I could just do what I wanted and we didn't think about it. And like literally it comes out, I don't know what year they became commercially available, but me and my dad were like, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
We literally still have that bicycle hanging up in his garage because my dad loves that bicycle. He still rides it.
Yes.
And like, I'm like, it's right there. It's the first one. I literally have like probably floating around somewhere at my mom's or something is probably the entire binder of that science fair project with the power data. Like, I'm like, God, if only now I have a business mindset because I'm in business, you know, so it's changed. And I still have, but my dad is still pure engineer. Like he works for engineering companies is what he does. He wants to make money, but he really likes to solve problems. Yeah. And so he doesn't think like, how do I make money and then solve a problem to make money? He's like, I want to solve a problem, you know? So we had the first one. It's so cool. I wish I could dig that project up and like relook at it. It was really cool. I mean, I remember it pretty well. And
for those of you that may not have a cycling background, let me put it into perspective. There is not a professional cycling team that isn't training with power. We call it FTP, functional training power. There isn't, I would say if you were to go to a typical triathlon, I would say a minimum of 50% of the people, it could be a sprint distance all the way up to Ironman. You're seeing power getting into gravel bikes now. You see them in mountain bikes. And just to give you an idea what Derek's onto and didn't even realize it, when we first started measuring power on a bicycle, it was on a rear hub.
Yep.
And then it went from a hub, then it went to the entire bottom bracket, added like 5 pounds to the weight of the bike. Now they've got them so light that they're actually in the pedal spindle, and that's how they can measure them. They have them in crank arms.
So ours was crank arm, and you would laugh because literally ours was probably the weight of a stamp. And then the electronics was at the time one of those PDAs or whatever they were called, like the early, helper devices with the screens and whatever.
Yep.
That was the electronic data collection device. So that way, it wasn't heavy, but wasn't super light. But now with like Arduino and all this shit, you could have it weigh nothing. And it's just crazy that wasn't something we thought about, right? So it's funny, we looked at them now.
And I'm going to back you up even more, because you made a comment in a very quippy way, not even thinking much about it. You said that you went home and you created software, you wrote code to study the airflow, and I think it was airflow is what you...
Suspension, and then we have done
suspension.
Both.
Okay. Yeah. So stop and think about that for all the listeners, right? You're creating something mechanical. There's a disjoint between someone who can write the software to get the analysis out of the equipment. Then there's people that create the equipment that have nothing and have no understanding of programming software to get those two together. And Derek's doing both simultaneously. You go, Rob, why does that matter? Well, you guys have all followed me on the Garmin platform. The collection of data is not the hard part anymore. The telemetry that's in the watch, it's pretty, and I don't want to say this disrespectfully, Derek, the technology isn't changing tremendously.
Oh, no.
It's kind of like in the human performance world when we're trying to get 1% out of a top guy. It's a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's the collection and the interpretation of the data. For those of you that are on the Garmin, in the last couple of years, we now have body battery. We didn't have that. We now have HRV. We didn't have that. So as the software, and you get a lot of programming, I'm not calling it in a negative way, fundamental software that's calculating an innumerable amount of variables to say, well, how can we, because for example, HRV, heart rate variability, if you go to a clinical setting, is measured when you're awake to measure alertness, but Garmin does it when you're asleep. So think about it. They had to reverse engineer what attributes do we have in the watch that we can now come up with a variable that's going to interpret HRV, body battery, etc., respiration rate, oxygen penetrate, all of that information that normally would take separate devices. Now, Derek, I want to, because I'll talk my stuff next show, but when we come back to yourself, are you still programming software? Like you read these books and you've got this, dyno, you've got the, what did you call it? The airflow?
Yeah, flow bench.
Yeah. Flow bench. Thank you.
Yep. So not so much. So back in the college days, more eager and interested, and my dad's still in that world. So nowadays, I say, hey, Dad, I really have this cool idea. Can you help me with this?
Nice.
So I'll forward it over to him. So like now, I guess I'll share it. On the engine side of things, we have data collection for dirt bikes. So and it's not just engine, it's suspension as well. So you can, and now there's a product that's fantastic. I cannot believe I don't see it everywhere, but I guess I can because it's really pricey. I'm blanking on the name. I own it. I own our own, like the data acquisition system we use for bikes and ECUs and stuff like that, which is it's a data box. So you can put whatever inputs you want into it.
Okay.
And it can do suspension, it can do engines, it can do whatever you want. And this other system's purely for suspension. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of it. I got it sitting in the shop. Anyway, it only does suspension, and it uses your iPhone as the data collection source instead of its own little box. So you put these sensors on your bike, you go ride with your iPhone, it Bluetooths to your phone, and it collects all your suspension data. And then it actually, like you said, it's not just, suspension's so complicated.
Yeah.
Because you can measure what it does, but that won't tell you what the rider's telling. It'll just tell you what the suspension is doing. And sometimes it's very helpful when the rider says, I was so harsh, it's so stiff, and you go look at the data, you're like, well, no, you were bottomed all the time. Actually,
it wasn't stiff
That's
enough.
Great, right?
Yeah.
That's nice. But then there's times where the rider's like, I don't know what the hell it's doing. And you go look at the data and you're like, well, it's pretty good. And he's like, oh, I don't like it. That's the challenge. So their software is really impressive. I cannot think of it, but I'll look.
Is that something that people could contact you and purchase?
Yeah. And I would direct it to the company too. I think it's really the interpretation that I'll have to look it up.
No, that's
so
okay.
Long and short, they have AI now, right? What they'll do is they'll give you basically in your iPhone a post-ride analysis of your front to back ratio. So, okay, your front's a little stiffer, softer than your rear, or vice versa, whatever that balance ratio is. That's a really brilliant way.
Yeah.
It's one of the better tools you can use. And it doesn't mean that it should be a certain way. It just tells you where it is.
But
and
it's
what
in
you'll
real
find
time, correct?
real time. Yeah, no, it's not, it's measuring all that data. You can go look at your entire moto on it, like your entire ride. And then it can also aggregate it for you, basically average it for you. And just say, okay, on average, when the front goes down on a jump 6 inches, the rear's going 4 or going 8, and it is balancing it out. It's taking the two movements at the same time and telling you what the front is doing to the back. It also gives you a measurement of absorption. I don't remember what they call it. There's a name that they have, but essentially they have a sensor on the top of your fork, and then of course they have the sensor at the bottom that's measuring the motion. And imagine if we absorb a bump perfectly, the bottom comes up, the top doesn't move, and then it goes back. But that's not how suspension really works, and you could go into the physics of it. But what happens is we have a percentage that is absorbed, right? But the top's going to move some, but the bottom's going to move more. So that's really how your suspension works, is you hit a bump, and some of it goes into your suspension energy, and it's damped out through heat. So you convert energy to heat through your oil. And then the rest of it's just transferred to you. And that transfer to you is your bike and your bars moving up towards you. So they actually measure that movement ratio between the bottom and the top. And then they can tell you what your absorption rate is, right? So if you had Supercross suspension on an outdoor track, your absorption rate would be practically 0, where your bars are moving up the same amount the bottom's moving up. And then if you have like really, really, really soft trail suspension, you would have a high absorption rate. And then, but they tell you that. So that's a really good metric. But like you said of the watch, the sensors have been there forever. That's not the hard part of suspension. Why people have strayed away from data on suspension and you don't see it prominent within the industry is the interpretation is very tough.
Yes.
And so this is what their attempt at that was, is let's create an app that gives you a lot of data and filters it into a couple areas to look, just like you said with the heart rate. And so, of course, you're relying on them to be smart about that filtering. If is it good, is it not good? But I really like what they've done on that particular app, to where if you kind of know what you're thinking and what you're talking about, you can say, okay, the front to back balance means the front is 30% stiffer than the rear, according to this data on aggregate. Or like just looking at all the jumps, all the bumps, the motion. So some people like that, but some people don't. Maybe we need to make the rear stiffer based off that data, so that now the front and the back are more balanced. Or now the rear's too stiff and the front's too, those are the things that I think are smart about what they've boiled it down into an aggregate. And then the other side is like, I think they have a percentage, it's a histogram. And you're probably familiar with histograms and statistics. It's telling you how often your forks are, how deep they are into the stroke or your shock. So it's like saying, okay, 95% of the time you're only in the first third of your travel. Well, that would tell you, hey, yeah, you're way too stiff. Okay, 50% of the time you're 3/4 of your travel. That's probably pretty good. But if you're, the last inch of your travel more than 5% of the time, that's probably way too soft, right? And those are some things you can categorize, and they tell you that. They give you that histogram of percentage and stroke and all that. So I'll have to think of it. They're a fantastic, for what it is, for basically they can send you some hardware. You already own your smartphone. Really, really innovative product. And I do believe that it's like $3,000 or $2,500 for that item. And I expected, with mountain biking crossing over to dirt bikes, because mountain bikes are huge on data now. I'm just seeing incredible amounts in that. I thought Moto would start to follow suit, because really, who's buying dirt bikes nowadays? Well, it's young people who have money. Who has money who are young? A lot of these tech kids, right? So not just the racing side, but people who are 20 to 40 who ride dirt bikes. Well, we're near Austin. You see it at the track. It's these young 20 to 40-year-old people who have plenty of money, who are very intelligent, who love technology. I expected them to buy that stuff up in droves, and they don't. They don't. Now, granted, once you take that data, here's the challenging part, and what we talk about navigating amateur motocross. Okay, I have this data. What shop can I take this data to if I'm not doing my own suspension,
right,
and get somebody to work with me on this, right? Can I say, hey, I got a service going on. I'd also like you to change the valving we just did a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago to a little bit of this. Based off the data, I think I need to go a little bit stiffer with the rear. I need to go a little bit softer with the front. A lot of these shops just wouldn't do it. Right. And then on top of that, a lot of people don't understand suspension, how it works. So they're not willing to work with the shop like that. Like, in my opinion, to navigate amateur motocross, you need to find a suspension shop, and it could be a big name or it could be a little name, but somebody that you work with over the course of the year, and they can't do it for free, right? They got to pay their bills. How do you work that in? Well, the way we tell our guys, if you do suspension with us, is, hey, we'll do your revalve. It's this price. And we have our, If you hate it on first ride, bring it back. No questions, that type of deal. But hey, if we're in the right direction, it's good, great. Your first service, we're already talking with you, getting messages. What's your feedback? Okay, you're bringing it in I need fork seals. I need to freshen my fluid up. I need to recharge the shock, new fluid. Let's call it the 20 or 30 hour mark or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should be doing around there. Most people don't, but you should. We're telling them, okay, what feedback do you have? What can we improve? We've been talking to you enough times to know, okay, we consistently think that we've had to soften the forks and stiffen the shock this entire period you've had it. So now when it's back in here for this no additional cost on the service, I'm going to go in there and make those changes to the setup. And
Based on the collected data. Not perspective and opinion, but by collected data.
Data and feedback, right? The data is one thing, and then what's your feedback, right? Okay, we did a couple changes for you based off what we thought, and you liked those changes. Okay, great. We're going the right way.
We keep those, and we keep building on it.
We work on that. And then every 20 to 30 hours, you're working and improving your bike. Now, at the amateur national level, you're trying to be successful. You're going to have a lot of bikes, or people do. I'm not going to say everybody does, but typically most of these 85 kids have 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5, right? That's an opportunity to test, and your parents don't get that. So that's an opportunity if you work with a great suspension company. Okay, we got 5 bikes. That's going to be a lot of money to do all 5. Well, why don't I work with a shop that will do all 5, and then we're going to do them a little bit different. And maybe because I have 5 bikes, there's no way I can't get this shop to come to the track with me, or we can go to a local place or a track that's near them so that we can... 5 bikes is worth that guy's time, right? To be out there with you. Let's do a 2-day test. Let's spend that extra cash and go test until I actually have suspension that I really think is good. And now we'll set all 5 bikes pretty much the same, right? And shops, I mean, you could get an FC, an Enzo, or if you have them local to you and there's a local track they can go to for 5 bikes, they're going to be more than happy to do that because you're spending, let's loosely quantify it, $5,000 with that individual to do 5 bikes. Right. So at the end of the day, you could really have good suspension by working with them. And then what'll happen from there is, okay, now we're at the first month on this bike. We've gone to our practicing and we've raced a little bit and we have some complaints. You have to be realistic. Are these complaints something we can fix, or is it something my rider needs to fix? Number one. Mm-hmm. But if it's consistently like, yeah, man, it's pretty good, but man, we're bottoming the rear end so hard all the time. And a lot of people don't know what that is. They struggle with that. That's your job as a parent. You need to learn these things. If you want to be successful, either have a shitload of money and pay a guy who knows these things that come to the races with you.
Yeah.
Right? Or get educated. Start watching. And, I said this on the Hopper show with Rebound on the pro bikes. You do not need a degree in rocket science to watch what the rear tire does or the front when a bike leaves a jump.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard. And I was at Loretta's last year. I think it was last year. Yeah. So last year with one of my long-term clients, and they don't use us on suspension anymore. And it's a convenience thing. They're not located close. So they use it. And I think they should.
Yes, I agree.
They should use a local shop.
Yep.
Well, the suspension was trash, and I'm not, whatever. And it's not and I don't know if it was the shop's fault or not, because he had 2 kids, same company. One bike was horrible and it did totally different things than the other bike. So I think it was the kid telling the shop, hey, this is what I want, or whatever. But the Rebound, basically, he'd leave a jump and the rear tire would stay all the way in the fender and never come out practically till he landed. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, first practice, I'm like, hey, I think your shock's broke. He's like, what? And I'm like, and he's a very good client, great friend of mine. And he's not, he knows I'm not just trying to sell him or talk.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm like, watch the shock, watch everybody else on the track and watch your kids when he jumps this jump we're sitting next to. And he goes, I'm like, I'm not gonna even tell you what it's doing. You'll see it. And he goes, hey, does it look like his shock's not coming out to you? I'm like, yep. I'm like, I think something's up. He's like, wow, 100% right. So we get back to the pits, go push down on the bike, and it doesn't come up, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, something's up. So they switch shocks, blah, 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 get through the weekend. Great. You as a parent can do that.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do is watch. You may not know what the perfect Rebound setting is, but if you watch 25 motorcycles at the fastest race in your area, go watch the pros, go watch the B class, go watch the fast super mini kids, and all 25 do something way different than yours, you probably are doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So that's something that you can do very easily. And then number 2 on suspension, parents do not play. They're afraid to touch clickers. And they're like, there's some magic setting in here that I have to be at. And if I move from that, it's broken. I can't do it. It's scary. It's like, no, they put those on there for you to turn them. If they didn't want them on there, they wouldn't sell them with it, right?
Right, right.
Tool that you can use to make your bike better. So like when you have a 10 millimeter and a 12 millimeter on a KTM, a 13 millimeter wrench to adjust your chain, you have a screwdriver in that toolbox that adjusts those clickers. And you should be adjusting them because you can make your bike better. You can make it worse, but you can always go back. Oh, I went 3 clicks stiffer and he hates it. Okay, we'll go 3 clicks softer. And maybe it's better. But people are so afraid that they're going to mess something up that they won't play with it. To me, the best thing you could do as a parent is go to the track one day without an agenda of being fast that day and an agenda of, for the next 2 hours, we're going to play with the bike. And we're not going to worry about motos. And then later in the day, we'll worry about motos or vice versa.
Right.
And go sit in one section where the worst, nastiest braking bumps are and go turn your clickers every which way, all the way in, all the way out, all the way fast, all the way slow. Listen to your rider. And if your rider doesn't know what's better or worse, ask him what's different.
Yeah.
And then say, let's write this down in a little journal. He said all the way stiff felt like this. Okay, that's in there. All the way soft felt like this. That's in there. In the middle felt like this. Okay, which one is better? Maybe this one. Okay, let's play around in between those settings. Okay, it's 12 is middle, 24 is soft. Go to 18.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that feel? Now, what does that? Oh, wow. I'm softer on my fork and it feels like it shoots up faster. Slow the rebound down a little bit. Does that get it better? Does that make it worse? Just do that so that you know what your clickers do. And maybe, just maybe, whatever clickers you started the day at, oh, we were at 14 and 6, we were at 10 and 8. The end of the day, you left the track at 5 clicks different, and it's a whole new motorcycle for you.
Yep. Well, and to your point, we have Josh Gilbert, MXGP rider, rides for the Gabriel SS team. They're a KTM team, and he gets to ride a Prado. And, you know, the reason why I bring it up is I look at his dashboard and he's out for 8-9 minutes and he's got 25-30 sessions. And then he texts me that night and he's like, yeah, we did suspension all day. To your point, exactly. Do a couple clickers, 2 laps, couple clickers, 2 laps, change the shock, get a baseline, couple clickers, make a time. And just so everybody's aware of this, and we're going to talk more about this in future shows, I've actually been hired by certain manufacturers. Hey, if we do X to the bike, what is the economical impact on the human body? So let's just say we change springs on the shock, right? We can actually go and look at where you're at on the track. We can look at your average and max heart rate. Does the average and max heart rate come down? And then if you're using something like my Pitboard or Lip Pro, you can see what's the fastest line around the track that the bike in a balanced, handling it properly. And if those two come together, lap times, taking the optimal line based on the shortest distance around the track, it may be through the nastiest, gnarliest braking bumps, but if the bike is balanced and if it's soft and it's plush, and that's a relative term, of course, right. But then what kind of economic impact does that have? On these 3 laps, heart rate was 173. We make some adjustments, same exact line, heart rate's 8 beats less. Well, in a 30-minute moto plus 2, that adds up.
Yeah. So on that topic, the American, I don't know what has happened to the Americans. I don't know what has happened to our country. I see it all. I'm actually in a little Instagram spat. I love starting one of these once a month. There's a corner where Garrett Marchbanks goes around a corner at Club MX and he's on a 250F. You don't see it, but he clearly had to have downshifted coming into the corner. Yeah. He's hitting the rev limiter wide open into the corner. So it's like a big bermed banked corner that you can hit wide open. It's awesome. He rails the turn.
Yeah.
But he's on the rev limiter going into the corner and through the corner. And then there's a little roller that comes out. He upshifts and he lands and then he goes to a jump and you can hear the bike drop in tone, not in the limiter, and he accelerates and hits this jump.
Yeah.
Now, my first comment said shift.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know what you're talking about. He's wide fucking open. He's in it fast. Well, you're not a good rider. You don't know what you're talking about, all this stuff, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, even if that were true, Garrett Marchbanks is an amazing motorcycle rider. If you're watching this podcast and you want your kid to be successful, he's somebody you should aspire to be. He has conquered amateurs, right? He was one of the best there was.
Yep.
But as a pro, he's right on the cusp of a great pro. He is at the I have a ride on a quote unquote B level team. I think they're working their way towards A at club, but a B level team. I had a factory ride that I no longer have at PC, and I'm not winning races. Well, teams only care about winning, and that's not something that's totally wrong with our sport. No, there's only one winner, one or two winners, maybe. Outdoors, there was what? Oh yeah, there was one this year.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like, there's not that many winners, but teams only want to invest in winners or guys who can win, and he hasn't done that. That's why he's not on a factory team anymore. Not to say that he wouldn't be a better investment than some amateur kid, but they've already passed over him. If he were to make little improvements in his riding, like shifting into that corner, he would be a better pro and work his way towards this deal. And of course, I'm getting the hate side of the comments, and I'm sure there's some guys on there who agree. They just don't comment, fine, whatever. And you don't have to agree. Having said that, there's I'm blanking on his name. He's one of the top Australian pros. Like been like their national champion year over year over year.
Todd Waters?
No, before him maybe. Or after, I don't. If I said the name, you would know right away. He came back to racing this year a little bit. He was on KTM private effort, very fast. He's got a YouTube channel, and here's what my point was. He did a YouTube video on suspension testing. He went to an outdoor national. I think he's just kind of coming back into it. He's a little bit older, not really chasing titles, but he's still like top speed. You'll know. It's not a Moss, but it's
not
like
Clout, not Luke Clout.
I'll have to think, but anyway, I'll find it. And we'll next time we'll go over it.
Yeah,
he had a YouTube channel. He goes to national, gets his butt kind of whooped, not really, but for him, and he decides to stay and ride the track the next day, like the off day, and work on suspension. And it is a lesson in working on suspension if you're an American consumer or not, have never done this. They go out, they do lap times, number one. Number two, they do suspension settings and clickers and plays with his setup and his bike and his balance. Suspension is not just clickers, sag, fork height, all these things. On a KTM, oftentimes air pressure. And so what he does is he goes out, he does all this testing, but he also keeps a stopwatch. And it was interesting because he did a couple things, and one setting was clearly much faster. Like, oh, wow, I just dropped 2 seconds. Like, okay. But he didn't love the way it felt. And then the setting that he really liked the way it felt was a good bit slower. Not just in that other setting, but slower than his base.
Okay.
And so he ultimately ended up going with the faster setting. And it was like not just one laps, it was multiple laps. And it was really, really good testing.
Yeah.
And I commented, I'm like, this is amazing. You did everything right. You did all the way around the gambit. You looked at lap times. You didn't just factor in feel, which is what a lot of people do. You looked at the entire picture.
Right.
And I said, that's awesome. I wish more Americans did this. And then he commented back. I don't recall what it was, but it was something like, thanks. And yeah, it's obvious how he got to where he is. He's very analytical about how he rides. He's involved in his motorcycle. He knows his motorcycle. He's smart enough to go make those changes. But he didn't just grow up that way. He didn't just be born out of the womb that way. He has taught himself that skill, the same that people teach themselves how to do their job on a daily basis, the same they teach themselves how to go to school, the same you teach yourself how to drive. These are all skills you can learn if you put in the time. And that just, it made it very obvious to me why he was a champ, why he was so good. And all you had to do is watch. And clearly, whoever he's worked with over there over the years has had that approach. And actually, have you seen some of those video series with Moss's dad?
No, I haven't seen those.
They're starting to pop up on some social medias. I guess he really was a huge part of the training for the Lawrences early on in their career. I didn't know if he's a trainer or not.
Yeah, he is.
Typical Australian.
He's very popular. He's probably he's like the equivalent of Colin Millsaps here stateside. Yeah,
super brash, straight to the point, which I like personally. Yep. And he basically is just saying, if you listen to him, they're analytical in the sense that we look at this, it's a weak link, we improve it. Yeah, and he said it basically, but I don't know if he trained them a lot or a little, but I think they were just friends. His dad and them were friends, and Moss was fast. And so he said what Dazzy did was he learned rapidly how to improve.
Yes.
So he said he learned from Moss, oh, you work on this. Oh, we're going to go work on that.
Yep.
Oh, I don't have this skill in the toolbox. Well, I better add that to the toolbox. I'm going to go work on that. And so they're analytical about it. Here in the U.S., I don't see that. I don't see it with clients. I don't see it with customers. And it just drives me nuts. And if you try to bring it up to people, they're like, well, I just bought my suspension from so-and-so and it's perfect. I never turn a clicker. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, it's not perfect. And next, 3 months later, they got another brand on their bike. What was wrong with your suspension? Oh, we had our problems, no good. We went to this other company and then 3 months later, it's like, oh, we have more problems. And I'm like, you went to Factory Connection and Enzo and Pro Circuit and
the best of the best,
right? All of the best, and none of it's good enough. Is it really the bike?
No, and it's like when somebody comes to us, and I don't mind being public on this, we always research how many trainers have they bounced through.
Right.
Because if you're looking for a blame game, I'm not interested. If you're looking for a trophy coach, I'm not interested. I'm into accountability, responsibility, and quantification of data. I always say, I mean, even when I did the CBS special with Dunge, right? I'm quoted as saying, I don't live in a world of emotions. I live in the world of zeros and ones. You're either getting leaner, stronger, and faster, or you're not. And you bring up something very interesting. Just because somebody's textbook says this is the way to do it, there's nothing new well, I don't know if I can say this because I'm not as educated as you are. There's nothing new in the world of physics. We're not creating something. Just like in the world of physiology, there's no new workout. There's no new magic elixir. Heart rate training, heart rate ladders, negative splits, even tempos, race intensity, blah, 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 right? All the physiology. The way that you put it all together in the way you interpret the data to make sure that it fits the athlete from where they're at to where they want to go, utilizing the resources and the time that we have, is the same way going to the track, 1 bike, 5 bikes, whatever combination may be, being willing to sit down and go, let's get a little piece of paper. I do want to back the train up a little bit. We've got about 10 minutes left here, and I want to make sure that we get into this. You and I, we did not set a framework of this conversation, and we won't set a framework of future shows that we do together. If anybody's followed me publicly for any period of time, one of the things that I always teach when I do a performance camp is gear up, shift up, grab another gear. I always try to teach them, keep it in the lower RPMs, get more of the torque curve out of it, and it also softens the suspension. Now, that's me, a physiologist who's ridden since 78. I know nothing about the physics. You and I have spoken about this off the record. I've had the privilege of talking with Bones Bacon when I taught at the Ricky Carmichael University, RCU. And then I sat and listened to him talk about how 1 millimeter of an adjustment in a linkage, I think it was Tedesco and Purcell, one liked the wheel all the way in the front of the swing arm, the other one liked it all the way in the back.
Right.
He talked about all the different configurations of how if the wheel's further back in the swing arm, it changes the linkage and the X and the Y and the Z and I'm just, I'm blown away. And I'm very left brain, but that's way out of my pay grade. In your opinion, why did you say shift to Marchbanks?
So I think this should be, what is a rev limiter number one? A rev limiter is limiting the speed the engine can go because we're trying to not break parts. And on a 4-stroke, we break parts if we turn them too high of an RPM. Valves float, cranks and rods snap, pistons break. There's a limit to every part. And so that's why we put a rev limiter on a bike. It also is directly connected to the rear tire. Your engine turns, your rear tire turns. There's stuff in between there, but they're all connected to each other. So however fast your engine turns is how fast that wheel will turn. And when the engine stops turning faster, the wheel stops turning faster. So if you want to go faster around a dirt bike track, then you need to allow your rear tire to go faster. And your rear tire goes faster when you upshift. It's the only way. Yep. So at the end of the day, unless you're going around that racetrack in 5th gear on a 4-stroke, they have 5.
Yep.
On the rev limiter at probably, you think down on 250F, that'd be about 75 miles an hour. All the way around the track, you're not going as fast as that motorcycle can go. Yep. So all you're doing by hitting the rev limiter is limiting the speed that you are capable of going in that moment.
And wouldn't you agree that you're actually slowing the bike down?
Yeah, well, it can't accelerate any further past that.
Because I always say when I teach a camp, we're either accelerating or decelerating. We don't ever want anything in between. I always do this illustration.
Right.
You're either on the gas or you're on the brake.
And I think that
the bike is bouncing off the
roll speed, right?
Yes.
Maybe there's a little in between, but I agree with you.
There's a little in between.
We should always have.
Yeah.
It's also hard to not load the tires. I think you're correct. Like if we're accelerating or decelerating, we load the tires in a way that we like, right?
But what's interesting is on a 2-stroke, for anybody who grew up on 2-strokes, like you're saying, you were probably the last generation that went, hey, if I fall off the pipe on the 2-stroke, I can feel it decelerate. Okay.
Exactly.
Keep that in mind. If the bike 2-stroke, and that's why I always tell the young kids, just because it's screaming doesn't mean it's accelerating.
Nope.
And you're not in that sweet spot of being on the pipe. Well, if you're bouncing off the rev limiter, it's accelerated and now it has no other place to go.
Right. The way limiters work, especially production bikes, the way Star had them for a while, is it hits the limiter, and then actually in the software, the way they're cut is, hey, the RPMs have to drop a certain amount before we let the engine run again. And then it runs, and then it drops. What happens when the bike RPMs drop? Your rear tire RPM drops. So you actually slow down. So you're stuck in this maximum speed range. Now, why do pros do it? Why did he do it in that corner? Because that's as fast as he wanted to go. That's the fact of the matter.
That's what people don't understand. You control the speed with that shifter.
Right.
Now, if we want to jump into the physiology, and we'll talk about this in future shows, everybody wants to go faster, but you're limited by how much blood sugar is in your liver to process speed. I talk to Jeff Ward about this all the time. When he raced the Indianapolis 500, when you come out of turn number 4, you're already looking at turn number 1.
Yeah.
You don't wait till you get into the corner. You're always looking. And he said you would get so comfortable at 200 miles an hour, you felt like you could get out of the car and walk because the brain started to process what this felt like versus being stuck here.
Think of the physiology of this too. And I hate vet riders drive me nuts over this. They want 450s because they can lug them.
Yep.
Okay. I can ride it easier. It's so much easier. The reality is, look at the data. They're turning the throttle 20%. That's it. They don't want power. They just want to not rev the bike.
Yeah,
but there is a mental physiology to this, which is if you hold your 250F wide open off the rev limiter, you sure feel fast. Your brain tells you you're going fast. Everything seems like it's faster. If you upshift, you're like, oh, I'm going slow. There's that I think that our brains correlate this higher RPM, this more rhythmic, faster sound to I'm going better.
Noise and a lot of vibration.
Yeah, things are happening fast.
Yep.
And it's like, hey, if you just upshifted, not only would you be capable of going faster, but your brain is going to be tricked into like the opposite side. The bike's slugging, we're doing fine.
And I'm flowing. I used to have I have all my teams when, and this goes back a couple of years ago when Roxon was debuting the new Honda 450 and they were trackside. I don't even know who filmed it. And you go by and you just, it's never, and I would say to my teammates, I'd say to my team members, listen to the bike. And yeah, you could argue, is it truly a production bike? Probably not. Is it a 4-speed transmission? I'm not getting into all those arguments. But what I'm saying is listen to where he rides it.
Bring up Roxon
and then watch that rear end.
I'll give you a great example that I think epitomizes it. It drives me nuts. I'm in a group Instagram thing with some great guys here in Texas who are vet riders and stuff. And my take's generally different than theirs. And Roxon and Brown, have you watched the video of him and Carson Brown, the Red Bull videos where they race each other? And there's the Super Mini one and the 125 one.
Yep.
I don't know if you really, from what I understand, that was out at Sandbox, where Caden and the HBI guys are and stuff some guys we work with. And Chase is out there and whatever. If you listen, I really do believe they brought them in. That's the first time Kenny rode those bikes. And I'm sure he got a little practice in, but like that day, that's it. Kenny hasn't rode a 2-stroke in forever.
Yeah, you're probably back in Europe.
450 national champion, 450 Supercross guy. That's what he's been riding forever. He hasn't rode a 250F in years, right? Like but he did grow up on 85s and stuff, right? And he did ride 125 BMX in Europe.
He's world champion, yeah.
My takeaway from it was go watch Carson Brown's unbelievable. Let's just first off and stop. I love him. I love his content. He's an amazing dirt bike rider from a overall bike skill guy. One of the best. But he's not a Ken Roxon when it comes to racing.
Yeah.
When it comes to getting a lap time down, Carson Brown's never been that guy.
Yeah.
And so what I found most interesting was listen to the two bikes in Roxon and Carson. Carson is screamed. The thing sounds fast. It's wide open. And Kenny's out there sounding like he's lugging, grabbing gears. If you get here at the shop and you're on the dyno and I said, hey, tell me when you think that 125 or 85 makes max power. Just tell me off the ear. Everybody will pick where it sounds sweet. If you look at the dyno curve, it has just nosed over already. That's where they sound awesome. The bike is pulling its hardest exactly where Kenny rode that bike, which is where it sounds on a 2-stroke like you're lugging. They literally sound like they're lugging. That is max power.
Yeah.
And then that beautiful 2-stroke sound we're accustomed to, that's way past max power. Now, people ride, there's a curve. People ride from the far side of the curve back to the peak. That's how they ride the bike. They don't ride the upside to the peak and down. And there's reasons for that.
Sure.
Long story short, Kenny rode it right on the money. And why? Well, number one, he's a world champion.
For a reason.
Number two, he's just riding off feel. He hasn't rode this bike in forever.
Yeah.
Right? So he's like, I'm trying to get the most out of it. It's a turd compared to a 450. Oh, and number three, he's trying to shift gears. Kenny knows that he can't scream the track in first. He's trying to go fast. So he's willing to upshift sometimes when the bike won't pull it. Will it pull this?
Just down and then just downshift. So quick.
Yeah. But he did it right. And guess what? He was faster on both bikes.
Yeah.
And a guy who rides these things all the time, who's familiar with them, who should crush Kenny at this little game. And yet here comes the world champion. Doesn't crush him, but wins.
Yep.
And it's like, granted, I think anybody who thought Carson was going to win is like, your mind is warped because you know how good he is at that stuff. You're racing a current top elite level world champion. Carson's not quite ever accomplished that. So, it's how we perceive ourselves. It's weird, but I would love for people to go watch that video. Go watch Kenny Rod. He's in the meat of that power. If your kid does not sound like that on his 85, his 125, his super mini, and he sounds more like Deegan sounded, or he sounds more like Brown sounds, your kid's overriding. He's over revving.
But I want to, with a little bit of time we have left, I want to go over two things real quick. One is Deegan. We know that Deegan bounces off the rev limiter, because I know we'll get some comments below that people will say, well, how does Deegan go so fast if he bounces off the rev limiter? How would you interpret that? And I've never heard of these sensors that you were talking about. You talked about them earlier being on suspension. Do they have the same thing on motors? Can we get a dyno report? Like you're talking about how much it's in the full throttle, 3/4 throttle?
Yeah. So I same stuff earlier. I forgot to say it. So we offer, and it's pretty expensive on the hardware side.
Yeah.
So we do this for our pros. It's part of the program of how we won Loretta's with Kate.
Okay.
I introduced this with them. It really improves, and we use it all the time now. I mean, I try to use it on everything I can. It's just a matter of time and money.
Sure.
So we have onboard data that integrates with our ECUs, and it collects everything engine performance. Now, it's not going to tell you how much power the bike's making, because we don't have a power sensor on the bike on the track, which is,
right.
I think, side note, I think Kawasaki had pointed that to Hopper. He did a video on this. I'm pretty sure they're running a power sensor, essentially a torque sensor, on the new 450, super advanced stuff. But it's out of MotoGP. It's incredible. Me and my dad talked about it. He's like, I have no clue how that sensor works. So it's super cool. But long story short, what we brought in, and this is where my dad comes in, is I had this idea. I'm like, all right, I have all this data, 35-minute moto, or whatever we decide to collect. But we did Outdoor National data with Caden this past year, and we did Loretta's data, and we did qualifier data, and we did all that in the past. How do I filter it? How do I look at it and make it useful to me? Because basically, if you were to see one of our data charts, it's just all over the place. Throttle on, RPMs up, this gear, right? It's crazy. And then it's 35 minutes worth. Well, you got to zoom into like tenths of seconds to really see what you want to see. I mean, motocross happens fast.
Yeah.
You go in a corner, you hit the gas, flick the clutch, and go. That's 0.3 of a second. I want to see what the mapping is doing in that 0.3. That's important. When you whack the throttle, I need to know what that mapping's doing. So I have to zoom into that level, but then I can't see the whole picture. And so
when you say whole picture, you're saying crack the throttle. You want to see what the power output is, as well as the balance and power distribution. When you say you want to see the whole picture,
when I see the whole picture, I mean, like, let's say I want to zoom into this 0.2. So like, let's say I zoom into a region of one corner on the track, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I can see the data. We can map. We can work on that, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to know, what is my rider doing on average? Where is he at? So what we've done now with our software is we've filtered this data, and I've had my dad create a filtering system.
Okay.
And I download it, boom. It runs through essentially AI, you could call it, and then it spits out histograms, it spits out data to us, it spits out averages to us, and then I can go look at it all and say, okay, on average, you're at, like at a histogram level, like there's different ways to average. We can do averages, which is of no use to me. You're on average, never on the gas. Even an outdoor national pro who's getting tenths is off the throttle 80% of the time. Why? Because you're coming into corners, right?
Sure.
So that people don't realize that. So we have to filter that out, get rid of that, and say, when you are on the gas, what percentage throttle are you at? What RPM are you at? When you go to, let's say, for example, if I'm building a motor package, where should I place my power? So should I place it where most people think on the dyno chart is good, or should I place it higher? Should I place it lower? Should I be focusing on wide open power, or should I be focusing on 80% throttle, 50% throttle?
And is this on the rider's characteristics?
Yes. So we can look at that and filter it out, and then it comes back to me, and I can say, okay, on average, when you are on the gas, you're at 50 or 60 or 70 or 80. Or 100. Like a Deegan is at 100 a lot of the time, right?
I remember they said that with Tomac too, and they're
correct. Tomac is that way. Deegan is that way. Barsha is that way. I've actually gotten to see Barsha's data. Yeah. And like his throttle is an on-off switch when you look at his data. Most riders roll in, they're partial, blah, 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 blah. Literally, Barsha's goes from like, there's a graph of 0, bam, 100, and he keeps it at 100 and then off. And then that's how he rides. But he uses the clutch to kind of modulate. And Tomac supposedly, haven't seen his data, supposedly very, very similar. When Tomac's on the throttle, he's wide open. So Deegan's the same way. So that's why you hear the limiter a lot with Deegan, is he's wide open. Obviously, the motor can't blow up, so they have to limit it. So it's the limiter. But if you really listen to Deegan, if he's going down a straightaway, or he's trying to get a big jump, or he's going down the start straight, he is shifting on time. Anytime he's needing to accelerate at maximum performance to get an obstacle, to out drag race a guy, he is shifting, keeping the immediate power, trying not to hit the rev limiter down the straightaway, because then you lose time.
Sure.
Maximize that bike. And you'll see this with amateur kids. Anytime they want to go fast, they grab gears, they're in the meat of the power, they get a jump. Like say there's a really tough jump to get. But then they go down a straightaway, it's really rough, it's long to the corner, and they needed to shift, but they're screamed out because they don't want to go faster into those bumps.
Right. And see, that's where I think this whole conversation is going to be. This entire concept of this show is exactly that. It's easy. We say this in the cycling world. If you understand gear inches, right? You and I are riding down the road on let's say our mountain bikes, same exact tire size, exact same gear ratios, front and back, same RPMs, same cadence. And all of a sudden you punch yours and you go one gear easier.
Yep.
I'm just simply going to ride away from you because you went down one gear. So my gear inches per revolution of the wheels per second, I'm going to go further away from you. And I'm always amazed at this because when you start looking at gear inches as a whole, to me, it revolutionizes and changes the entire outlook of racing. But here's the caveat. Most people don't have the brain sugar to process higher rates of speed. So that little shifter puts you right back to where you downshift to where you control where you're comfortable on entrance speed.
Right.
As well as, and to me, I say this to our team members and all of our clients, a perfect day at the track is the bike is balanced and you ride it to its potential. And when you push the human body can match whatever the bike and the ground and the velocity feeds it. When those two can gel, you feel like you're floating on, you're on marshmallows. No matter what you hit, yeah, it could be rough, but everything's so balanced and your brain is so in the moment with blood sugar levels, your strength, your endurance, your flexibility. As the bike adjusts, as the bike wants to do something, you intuitively, we call it proprioceptive response, you intuitively automatically respond. You can anticipate what's coming. And you hear this with the pros all the time, and you hear it way more than I do. When I do something to the bike, I want to know what I'm going to get in return, that predictability. Well, human physiology is the same way, but it can't be a yin and a yang. You can't be super fit riding a bucket Bronco, and you can't have the butter. I mean, if the average guy were to go jump on Roxon or Sexton or Tomac's bike, we couldn't. Yeah, exactly.
No, you're 100% right. Lopoto said this recently on Gypsy. I see the clips, and I saw some of your clips the other day. Great. Lo said, I was getting beat by Dungey every second moto.
Yep.
I was winning first motos. And I just basically, he's like, I was fit. And we all know he was fit. But he's like, but I was work. I was too tired in the second motos. I could not compete with Dungey that year on the second motos. And then he said, midway through the year, they got a new bike. If I remember right, this was between 2014 to 2015, if I remember right. I believe Kawasaki went to a new chassis in that crossover. So that's what I'm going to guess because I had a Cowie at that time. So long story short, if I remember right, that was that transition from 14 to 15 or 15 to 16, one of those two like chassis changes. I think it was 14 to 15. And then all of a sudden, Villopoto started. This is midway through the year. So like they were really, Kawasaki's probably like, we got to get this bike out. So they get it out, homologate it, boom, he goes, rides, and he ends up winning the title, winning some more second motos, whatever. But the point is, he was clearly, multi-time champion at this point, clearly fit enough, probably could be fitter, but fit enough. And at the end of the day, the bike was his limiting factor for his performances. Now, you never heard that. I think Villopoto was a consummate professional. I really like his approach to racing, which was, I'm going to go win on what I have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to bitch about the bike. I'm not going to tell my job is to sell Kawasaki's at the time. So I'm going to tell the fans it's the best bike there ever is because that's my job. That's who signs my paycheck. When I hate now that riders throw the motorcycle manufacturers under the bus, I hate it. So long story short, like you didn't know that. We didn't know that. Now we do. It's been 15 years, but 10 years. But at the end of the day, the bike does have to be good enough for you to gel, especially, and this is where you come into play. Like I think amateur racing, we're going to have to do another podcast because we got a little long-winded on I did on off-topic stuff, but you can ride basically any motorcycle to 10 minutes if you're fit. I don't care what it is.
Amen.
And if you're thinking that your bike is limiting you at amateur nationals in the C class or the 85 class, and that the reason your kid's at 20th or 25th is because the bike's not good enough, you're way, way wrong. And I hope that our podcast can shed light on that. You could take the fastest 5 kids there and put them on your bike, and they will be the fastest 5 kids there. Now, maybe the kid winning might get 5th. Maybe your bike is not good enough to go win. But at the amateur national level for 10 to 12 minutes, which is the vast majority of these motos, 4 to 5 laps, 2-minute laps, you're looking at fitness can override anything wrong with your motorcycle. Now, speed, obviously there's a role. Your suspension can't be trash, but we've had clients do it. So you can't tell me it's not possible. And I've had more than one do it. Take bone stock motorcycles with stock suspension and go top 10 Lorettas in the B and the A classes. It is 100% possible. So what I'd love for this podcast to bring out is the fact that oftentimes you go get your shit done and you get this company to do this, you might make your bike worse and you don't know it.
Yeah.
And so don't be knocking on stock motorcycles. At the end of the day, I think at the pro level, which is where hopefully this podcast, we want to get your kid to become a pro.
Yep.
That's the goal. How do you navigate amateur motocross and how do you become a great pro? And I think most people approach it wrong. At the pro level, we're talking about your world. Okay, I'm fit, but this guy is like in bicycling or whatever. Let's say it's what do they call them? The challenges where it's the 1-person race for 30 minutes ish.
Just the individual time trial.
Right. Those guys are chasing at the elite level a matter of 30 seconds over 30 minutes.
Easy.
So,
yep.
Right, that might even, the gap might even be tighter than that at the elite level, right?
Yep.
At the end of the day, that is where in pro racing, okay, my suspension needs to be perfect because I'm chasing tenths of a second per lap. And then I'm chasing mistakes. So if my bike's more forgivable, I can make a bigger mistake and not lose as much time. And then more importantly, physiologically, I don't care. You go look at the outdoor national lap times, the vast majority of pros do fall off at the 20, 25-minute mark, and they're going to drop a second and then 2 seconds, and the track gets worse, right?
Sure.
But like at the end of the day, if I can make it to where I'm fit enough and my bike is good enough at the last 15 minutes at moto to not lose 2 seconds a lap, but only lose 1 second a lap, think of that. That's 6-7 laps at 1 second a lap that I've made up. Well, go look at the times from 20th to 10th might be 15 seconds. So that is the difference right there in your race of putting all of those things together. Like you said, it's fitness, it's late moto fitness, it's bike, it's everything all wrapped up in one. That's where pro motocross is tough. It is a long enough time trial where the bike plays a role, the body plays a huge role, your recovery, like you said, between motos. I didn't know how the pros do it. This is your world. I do not know how pros get turned around in 1 hour. Blows my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely something we can, and then I would hope for this podcast, amateur racing, depending where you go, might be moto. Do you have a plan on the body? Like, this is where you come into play. How do we make sure that my kid can go from 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon and be strong all day and not crash and be mentally alert and have, like you said, the blood sugar levels, the liver, all of that correct to be successful? And I don't see many parents do it.
Well, we'll end the podcast on this, and we'll use this as the catalyst for the next show. The request has been, what's my side of this conversation associated with this podcast? And we'll keep it very top level. I'll give my background and why I have the opinions that I do and why our approach is the way it is. But we'll end this podcast on that thread of thought. And that is, when you look at some of these top amateurs that have essentially the red carpet ride all the way through amateurs, and then when they line up to go pro and they've never made fitness a priority, but their equipment was always so superior.
Yep.
That's when you see it manifest itself, where it's like, okay, you jumped in, you lined up at the first Supercross or Pro National, and out of 42 bikes on the line, 35 are legitimately fast.
Yep.
Now, the discrepancy between even Sexton's bike, Webb's bike, and Braswell's bike is nominal. At the end of the day, it's relatively nominal. If you put all numbers on, there's a lot of R&D dollars put into it. But on the output side of it, again, I may be completely wrong. Tell me if I'm full of garbage if I am. The discrepancy between those are not going to be double digits.
No, I mean, at that level, you're chasing percentages.
And that's what we want that's what we want the listeners to understand is, you can go and throw all the money at fitness, but if the bike isn't balanced, and I liked what you said, not just what the numbers show, but also that finite line in the integration of, are you comfortable given the track? Like you say, you may not be comfortable, but you're still faster, or you may be uncomfortable because the bike's not balanced and you think it's too stiff and it's really too soft. Then that's where these two constantly integrate with a puzzle piece that is never static, but constantly dynamic. And that's what I want to elaborate on in every show that we do going forward. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next one.
Great.
Our goal, guys, if you've stuck with us this far, thank you so much. Please leave your comments below. We're going to be very engaging in the comments. If you disagree with us, that's totally cool.
Yeah,
let's
just
just
be streaming comments, and then that way we can look at
keep
it.
the comments engaging. Don't get them to where they're just name calling, because I'll just straight up delete them, because I'm just not interested in a bunch of keyboard warriors that just like to talk smack, right? If you disagree, tell us why. Give us a chance to elaborate. The more engaging you are in the comments below, we will be incorporating them into it. Mom and Dad, if you've got a young athlete and you've got a question, like I said, we're going to try to do 2 shows a month, and we'll dive into as many issues that we can. We don't have a time frame on when this podcast is going to stop and end, and it will continue to morph, like we said, from vets back down, whether it's week-long amateur races, whether it's one-day races, whether it's weekend races. Heck, we may even get into GNCC racing.
Right.
But for the most part, we want to say, how do we navigate the landscape of amateur racing, moto, off-road? Because it's very confusing. It's all time consuming with all resources, and we respect that. And speaking of resources, thank you so much for giving us your time today. We deeply appreciate it. Our goal is to keep these shows about an hour and a half, and you can see nothing scripted. We're just bouncing some ideas around, and we definitely want to engage with yours. So with this being our first show, we want to say thank you for joining us. Derek, thank you for your time, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Be safe.